So today we're going to have a bit of a discussion about video game ownership because once again, this has become a very hot topic due to in part the fact that Ubisoft decided to come out and say that people need to get comfortable about not owning their video games. And when you look at that quote, when you look at that sort of sentiment on its own, it's a very scary thing for gamers to think about. Kind of depending on your age, though. You have to look at how things are within the video game landscape, because much like every other form of entertainment, the video game landscape is always shifting. I come from the era of Nintendo cartridges and VHS tapes. Look at the movie medium. We went from VHS tapes to DVDs to Blu-rays to streaming services. Then we got Ultra Blu-rays, but the priority has definitely been put on streaming services because it's a way for companies to make more money and control what you can and can't watch, essentially because they have ownership of these things and they decide to dictate when you can watch them and when they can be added to a service. The video game industry is kind of following along in those footsteps, and it scares a lot of people. Like I said, depending on the age of the individual. If you're used to having everything on a cartridge or a disc, and now you hear about this new scary future, it can be a bit jarring. You look at places like Best Buy, who are phasing out physical media. WWE just announced that they're no longer doing DVDs and Blu-rays anymore. Everything is in the cloud. Everything is in the streaming services. But video games, I feel like, are a bit of a different thing, because I can always just get a DVD or a Blu-ray player, and if something came out on DVD or Blu-ray, I can always just access that. I could pop my disc into that, or even a VHS player. I have a VHS player and some VHS tapes. As long as the tapes still have their integrity, I could watch these tapes at any point in time. It's not necessarily hard to access this stuff. But when we look at video games, it's a whole different world. It's a whole different ball game, and I feel like people aren't realizing that a lot of these video games that you have right now, you technically don't really own them in the same way that you do a movie, in the same way that you do like a music CD or something like that. Because of the fact that a lot of these disc-based games and even some cartridge games on the Nintendo Switch, what do they require? Do you just pop those in and then you play them? No, you don't. You have to download something. Third-party Nintendo Switch games, a lot of these games, there is a download that is required in order to play the game. With these disc-based games, you're essentially installing the game. Well, is it installing the game off the disc? No, there's actually nothing on the disc, just a file to announce to the console that, hey, we need to go onto the server and download this game. So how is it really any sort of different situation? Is this an overreaction by the video game community when it comes to stuff like this? Because if you're contingent on an online server to download anything, if that online server goes down, then that game is pointless. You know, if I buy Spider-Man 2 for my PlayStation 5 and I pop that disc in, do I get to play it immediately? No, it has to download the game onto my PlayStation 5 because the disc is just sort of like a key. It's just a way to access what is in the servers. If Sony decides to take down Spider-Man 2 because the license ran out or some sort of weird situation like that, the disc isn't going to save me. The disc is going to do absolutely nothing. If I buy that disc after the server has gone down, I still don't have access to it. Doom on the Nintendo Switch. If I buy Doom for the Nintendo Switch and I buy that cartridge, I don't have access to the game because I have to download so much stuff in order to access that game. If that server decides to go down and I can no longer access it, or the Nintendo eShop is down or something like that, like owning games in the modern era is really, it's nothing like it used to be. You know, I take this copy of WWF Raw. Okay, I own this. I own this game. Everything is on this cartridge. I don't have to worry about an online server or something like that because everything fits on that cartridge. You can't say the same thing about modern video games. PC gamers, what do they own? You know, you own your Steam library, but what if Steam goes out of business? What if Steam goes away? Do you have access to those games? Like, I really feel like I hate what Ubisoft said, because it's such a predatory thing, and it's going into this all digital age where you can't, you know, trade your games or sell your games because they are, you know, essentially in a cloud somewhere or on a hard drive of a system. I hate that Ubisoft said it, but is Ubisoft wrong in saying it? And that may come as a shock to you for me to say something like that, but is Ubisoft wrong with it? Because I honestly feel like technically a lot of these games that we play all the time, and some of the most popular games, we don't own. If a game is contingent on an online connection, do you really own that game? Because that game isn't always going to be there. That game isn't always going to be accessible because online servers get shut down. We've seen it with the Wii U and the 3DS. Go ahead, buy a 3DS game. Oh, that's right. You can't buy it digitally. Go play online on your Wii U. You better hope that it has its own server. So what do we do about this? Is there any way to sort of stop this? I really don't think so, because eventually we're going to get to the point where these systems don't have a physical media drive. And then once we get to that point, we're at the point of no return. We are all contingent. We are all dependent, like a nursing baby on a teat. We are all contingent and, you know, dependent on this mythical online server to always be there. Do you own Fortnite? You might have spent $1,000 on Fortnite skins, but you don't own that game. You own nothing about that game. You simply have access to the skins because you played money. If Fortnite is down, guess what? All your skins are pointless because you're not playing the game. I really feel like they said the quiet part out loud. And because of that, you know, people are getting really upset. But this just goes back to one of my main things. One of the things I always say. This is why emulation is important. This is why emulation is preservation. And yes, people do it for nefarious things sometimes to play modern stuff. But in 10 years, if the only way you could play a game that you purchased, you own that disc, you own that Nintendo Switch cartridge, if the only way you can play it is through emulation, and you're an anti-emulation person, are you going to change your stance? Or are you just going to you know, I'll never play this game again? You know, it's such a slippery slope. But it's the way, I mean, look at Game Pass. I have Game Pass. I love Game Pass. I download games onto my Xbox from Game Pass. But if that Game Pass game gets removed and I haven't downloaded it yet, I don't have access to that game. I had to buy Forza Motorsport 7 physically because it was removed from Game Pass because of licensing issues. You don't think that there's licensing issues with things like stuff that's being used in the game, you know, real songs and all this sort of stuff. Like, it's crazy to think that. But you really, in this modern age, you really don't own much. You know, Nintendo, for all their flaws, at least with a Switch game cartridge, like, most of the time it's on there. But if it's a third-party game, it's not. What are we going to see with this next generation? Games aren't getting smaller, folks. They're getting bigger. It's just going in the opposite direction. If you take away that physical drive on any of these systems, Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo, if there's no longer a physical drive, there's no longer physical media. And if there's no longer physical media that has everything on it, there is no longer game ownership. And that's the way we're moving. And I feel like Ubisoft, you know, I'm not trying to stick up for them, but I really think they just said the quiet part out loud. The realization that this is something that video gamers are going to have to deal with and endure very soon, sooner rather than later. But I just wanted to talk about this because I've seen so many sensationalist stuff where people are like, death to Ubisoft, how dare greed, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, if you look at the reality of the situation, if you look at the facts of the situation, this is already happening. And they're just saying, hey, it's probably going to be happening more. So you better get used to the idea. And how you decide what you decide to do with that information, you know, that comes down to the individual. That comes down to your beliefs. If you want to leave video games because of that, because you don't feel like you own anything, I don't blame you. I don't know how I will be at that point in time. Future is scary. I've seen the future and it will be. Seen the future and it works. If there's life after, we will see. So don't go out like a jerk. Seriously, if you haven't listened to the Batman 1989 soundtrack, it's 9 new Prince songs that he wrote in like 6 weeks. It's freaking phenomenal. Anyways, guys, that's just my thoughts on this situation, because everyone has to have thoughts on everything. And I figure, hey, I might as well speak up. Let me know what you think of this in the comments section down below, though. I'm sure I've pissed some people off with my sort of reasoning, but I think my reasoning is solid. And I think it's just the facts. It's just the truth of the matter. And unless you're going to be a freedom fighter and, you know, take it to these companies, there ain't really shit you can do about it. And as always, guys, thank you for watching this video. If you're new, hit the subscribe button. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next video. Later.